Hey, mom friends! This is Functional Medicine for Moms, where we look at motherhood through the lens of functional medicine. I'm your host, Kelly Moline, a pharmacist with advanced training in functional medicine. From pregnancy and postpartum to everyday parent life, we talk root causes, natural solutions, and real stories from our own family's journey, plus conversations with experts along the way. Hey, mom friends! Welcome to another episode of Functional Medicine for Moms. I am so excited for today's episode because I have a very special guest. Her name is Katie Collins, and she's a physician's assistant. And I've seen her on Instagram. You may have as well because she has a good following talking about vaccines and informed consent. And I think this is a really hot topic, and especially for moms, new moms. There's a lot of moms asking me on my take on vaccines, especially as a pharmacist, and then also being more kind of crunchy and more into the functional medicine. I have a lot of people asking me some recommendations on vaccines, but Katie here really specializes in that and has done a lot of research. So I always want to send people to people who have a lot of information and good information with studies, and so that we can have true informed consent no matter what decision you make for you and your babies, because as moms, that is our top priority. And I feel like we are well equipped to make those decisions, but it does take a lot of thought. And so I just want to jump right into it. I'm going to introduce Katie here. So today I'm joined by Katie Collins. She's a wife, mom of two, and a board certified physician's assistant based in North Idaho. Katie's worked in a variety of settings, from urgent care and family medicine to weight loss medicine, but she now focuses on holistic and alternative care for both adults and kids. What I love about Katie is her passion for helping families truly understand their options when it comes to pharmaceuticals and medical products. She brings us such a refreshing mix of conventional knowledge and crunchy holistic wisdom, and she's on a mission to empower families with real informed consent. Welcome, Katie.
Hello, thanks so much for having me. What an intro.
Yeah, so tell us more about yourself, Katie, and what led you to start educating people, especially on social media, about informed consent, about vaccines, about that kind of conventional versus holistic view.
Yeah, so I was working in conventional medicine and transitioned more into doing telehealth and alternative medicine with the work that I now do. And so I was providing a lot of COVID care, ivermectin treatments, and kind of looking at different options for people who are trying to find the root cause for their medical issues. So, in terms of kind of what led me to start sharing more about informed consent, I was honestly encouraged by my family to do it. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I love researching, and I take a lot of time to make these decisions for my own family, and I end up answering a lot of questions for my own family and friends. And so they really encouraged me and just like, hey, you answer all these questions from us all the time. It'd be great if you just like had like a spot where we could, reference back all of the, questions that we had for you. So I just decided to start, sharing kind of for family and friends. And it really has turned into way more than I ever thought it would. And it's so exciting. It really is such a privilege and an honor to help families make these really tough decisions when there's a lot of noise out there in terms of how much information you can look at. And it's really difficult to know who to listen to. And I try to, you know, balance what I've been taught as a physician assistant with now kind of what I feel like is reality and how us as moms are making these practical decisions for our families.
Yeah. Why do you think so many parents feel so overwhelmed about all of the vaccine info out there?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much of it now with how many well, and it's great because these conversations that are so like in the news today with RFK talking about this, with Trump coming talking about this, these questions people are asking, people have never really been able to have kind of open discourse about this, because asking questions about the childhood vaccine schedule has kind of been taboo. Really, so many families have felt just kind of when they show up to their pediatrician office and they say, hey, like, what's in this vaccine, or what, does this actually work? How is it made? Um, their pediatrician either meets them with kind of like, I don't know, or maybe being like a little insulted that they're even asking or questioning the childhood schedule itself. It's kind of just been this taboo subject. So now that all of this information is out here, people are starting to learn more, which is fantastic. But it can be overwhelming for families, because so often the pediatrician is just like, yeah, they're safe and effective. Why wouldn't you ever give this vaccine? Instead of saying, okay, here are the pros and cons, risks and benefits, actually giving true informed consent and letting families decide and make those decisions for their children. It hasn't really been kind of this open discussion. It's been kind of just a closed taboo subject. So I'm happy there's a lot of this discourse happening, because if it wasn't, it would make it a lot more difficult to be speaking out in this way, honestly, because now so many people are asking these questions, we can actually have this conversation, whereas before it was really shut down and censored.
Yeah. What kind of reactions have you received from parents and even colleagues of yours?
That's a great question. Um, Yeah, it's been mixed. Mostly very positive, honestly. Like a lot of families are just thankful for kind of a short, easy to understand explanation. I see a lot of pediatricians on Instagram, and while they are very smart and providing, maybe one side of the story, or at least some part of informed consent, it can be kind of um difficult to listen to if they're so smart and using terms that people may not understand. So I try to, in my videos, make it a little bit more of a casual conversation, and just kind of like a mom to mom sort of just an easy, as if I was getting coffee with you. That's kind of the style I try to give this information in, because it makes it a little bit easier to digest. And so in terms of the families, I've been getting a pretty positive reaction. Colleagues, I've actually, personal colleagues, like friends of mine, have been really thankful that I've been saying all of these things. But definitely there are, the haters online, as anybody has, saying that this information is just completely false, fake news, like as if I'm just completely deciding to just make a video and just lie to everybody as if like, it's so silly how a lot of the detractors will just believe that you are sitting down to make a video and just to lie to make money. And I just think it takes a big effort to really think that poorly of somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my past episodes, I shared with my husband, and I were talking about my 9-month-old baby's, like her appointment. So we brought her in for a 9-month appointment. And so we were talking about that. And I said how I like the pediatrician office we go to, because they really allow for the mom to make the decision on vaccines for our babies. And so they just ask, there's really no pressure. They're there to provide more information if we want it. They have alternative schedules if we want that. They have supplements that can help detox if needed. And so I really liked that out of the office. And so my husband then asked me, kind of while we're recording, so what have we decided with the vaccines? And people could sense my hesitancy to share that we haven't vaccinated our baby. And then as a pharmacist, that can be like really really surprising for people, and I know that. And I had one of my classmates from pharmacy school actually reached out to me, and she's like, "Thank you so much for sharing that. I could tell your hesitancy on the podcast. However, like she made the same decision for her and her baby. And she's like, thank you for sharing that, because I've been so hesitant to share that with colleagues, like worried about the judgment that she would receive. And so it is something that I think even as professionals, we're nervous to talk about, because of that judginess or
Yeah.
whatever. And I know every family is different with that. So I think that we as health professionals too appreciate that. And then as moms, just appreciate more information out there. So can you, Katie, dive into how vaccines are developed, studied, and approved?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Each one is a little bit different, but really, when you're looking at uh, kind of the general way vaccines are developed, they have to grow the thing that they're vaccinating for, whether it be a bacteria or a virus. They have to grow it in some sort of culture, and that's a petri dish with like nutrients in it. So that could be for the flu vaccine. It's typically like an egg culture. They do have eggless ones now because so many people are developing egg allergies, and so they think that that could potentially be related to having some vaccines developed in these egg cell cultures. So they have cultures where, the cell lines are either from just kind of a general nutrient thing that they have, but most of the cell lines are either from animal cell lines or from embryonic stem cell lines. And so that's kind of where some of the controversy lies in terms of how they are developed. The way that they're researched also is usually using embryonic cells as well. And so that's another kind of point of controversy where there are, abortions that happen just to harvest organs to research for vaccine development. So that's kind of a big point of contention that people have with how vaccines are researched and developed either with these cell lines. So they have to grow the thing that they're vaccinating for. And then they, create a solution that includes usually like stabilizers, emulsifiers, things that have to, you have to have certain compounds in these vaccines in order for them to stay like a clear liquid. Not all of them are clear, but they have to be in a liquid form. So these stabilizers, emulsifiers, and preservatives, people think of like polysorbate 80, something like formaldehyde as a preserver. One big ingredient in a vaccine that helps it to work quote unquote better is the adjuvant. And so the adjuvant in the vaccine is supposed to be it's supposed to help the immune system recognize that the material that you're vaccinating for is foreign, and it creates a more robust immune response to the vaccine and to whether the virus or bacteria that you're vaccinating for. So a common adjuvant prior to aluminum was thimerosal. And if you've seen in the news at all, RFK has just decided to, take thimerosal out of all vaccines, which they mostly were already kind of phasing those out already because it's a derivative of mercury. So there could be some potential health consequences from that. And then now, the more common adjuvant is aluminum, and it's in a form of aluminum salt. So it's still aluminum; it's a heavy metal, but in the form of an aluminum salt, it is smaller than as if you were like eating aluminum, because there's aluminum pretty much everywhere, in everything we eat, in the air, and the water, and things like that. And our gut and our skin have barriers in order to help our body detox and get rid of that aluminum. And what a lot of conventional doctors will say is that, well, it's the same thing when you inject the aluminum into the arm. It just gets detoxed the same way as if you were to eat aluminum. That is a huge point of controversy in, vaccinology today, especially with RFK now being in office. we've been hearing a lot more conversations talking about the dangers potentially with aluminum. So, and if you question aluminum, you're basically questioning the entire childhood schedule, the safety of it, because more than half of the vaccines on the childhood schedule contain aluminum. Yeah, so that's how they're made. That's how some of them are developed. And then we can go, if there's any vaccines, maybe, I could talk about a few vaccines and how they're researched. Each one is a little bit different. Generally speaking, I can say, it's the main argument for, the way we research vaccines is we can't just do a vaccinated group versus an unvaccinated group, because that's the gold standard, right? A randomized control trial with one group receiving one vaccine that you're experimenting with, and then the other group of people receiving saline, placebo control. But because so many vaccines are developed now, most conventional people will say it is now unethical to perform the gold standard unvaccinated, vaccinated randomized control trial because you are withholding a potential product that could, um, prevent them from getting a disease. So you're leaving a group vulnerable to disease if you have a true placebo group. And so that's kind of the reason, a huge reason why you see so many of these clinical trials with the vaccines being not gold standard. Like they're just not. They're just kind of poor quality trials to approve so many of the products that are given to millions of kids today. And so it's really, I think it's a good thing now that people are asking more questions because we need more long-term research to see if these clinical trials that are not showing really any serious adverse events, or maybe they do, but they're, um, they're maybe hidden in some way, or the data might be not large enough to create really any sort of conclusion on the actual safety of this product. And we need more long-term studies to see if these products are actually causing problems with our kids.
Yeah, and I know for me personally, when I was pregnant, the RSV vaccine recently came out for pregnant women can get it, and then there's an RSV vaccine for babies, and so that was like a really big push, especially when we were in the NICU, and so that to me, I was like, that seems very recent for me to know more information. So can you talk too about like the process that, as a vaccine is released and it's out in the world, how they may still be collecting data? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have kind of three systems of monitoring vaccine safety real time. We have VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. We have the Vaccine Safety Data Link, VSD. And then there's also VSafe, which was the new program that they created specifically for the COVID vaccine when that was being released. So I'll talk more about VAERS and VSD just because we have more, those are newer systems that we're working with, or not newer, older systems that we're working with. So the VSD is a data set of certain picked hospitals and data sets around the country that are have permission to look at data of their vaccinated cohorts. And so they are in charge of sending their data to this system where if there was any sort of if there's a new vaccine or if there's any sort of like weird batch of vaccines, they would see like a safety signal based on these picked places, and all of their data sets. So that's the VSD. That data used to be available to basically the public. You had to ask permission for it, but most scientists could just grab that data and do any sort of clinical trials that they wanted to observe any sort of vaccine safety or any safety signals that they think might be happening. Now that data cannot be accessed from the Freedom of Information Act. It's actually now out to a more private company, and each scientist needs to be approved before researching the product. And so, what some critics of the VSD might say now is that kind of is a selection bias, right? Like they're not going to allow certain scientists or groups to do studies on the VSD if it's going to show some sort of harm coming from a vaccine. But, in any case, the VSD is there, and there are several studies that have come out coming from the VSD establishing safety of certain vaccines that we have. So that's the VSD. And then the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, this was created when the government in 1986 took the liability away from the vaccine manufacturers, because when vaccines were all getting developed and studied and then distributed to the public prior to 1986, there were harms associated with them, and people were suing the manufacturers. Rightly so, right? But in the effort to save vaccines, the manufacturers went to the government and said, "Hey, these vaccines can be really life-saving, but we will go broke from the amount of lawsuits we're getting from the injuries that are happening. So let's make a deal where you take on the liability, and we have a system where you can track all of the injuries and things that happen, and then the government will then subsidize and compensate those individuals who got injured." So the 1986 Act, and so that was created to take away the liability from the manufacturers, and then VAERS was born. And so it's the government's way of tracking adverse reactions from vaccines. Critics of VAERS, and this is everybody. Everybody kind of acknowledges that VAERS is not the best reporting system because it's voluntary and it's passive. So it's not actively automated, where if a physician records a reaction into the system, it doesn't just automatically like go to VAERS. People can report their reactions much later. And it's voluntary. Physicians and parents and individuals who feel like they have had a vaccine reaction, they can voluntarily go and fill out this report for VAERS, but they're not mandated to. Now, physicians are instructed to. They say you should do this, but there's no sort of like consequence if they don't. The only people who are mandated to report in VAERS are the vaccine manufacturers themselves. So if they, in their post-marketing trials, notice any sort of safety signal or anything happening after they release this vaccine, they are required to report it into VAERS and then put that into the package insert. So the VAERS is not supposed to be used for like looking at it like a side effect list. Like if you look at the package insert, you're not supposed to be like, okay, these are all of the side effects that do happen. Like, it's more of these are things that did happen in our post-marketing surveillance of VAERS reports from this vaccine. And that's what's listed on the package insert there. So that's another kind of critique of VAERS there, because when you're trying to assess harm coming from a vaccine, you need the number of people who had the reaction, and then you need the number of people who got the vaccine. Well, we don't have the number of people who got the vaccine. The denominator here is how many vaccines are distributed to the public. So it's just like, like, okay, this office received a pallet here and this office received however many the manufacturer sent out. That's the denominator there. Well, that number is always higher than how many vaccines are actually put into the arms of individuals. So that, whatever the vaccine reactions are and whatever they are reported as, like, say, 1 in a million, it's going to be probably more often than that because there's not a true rate of how many people actually got that vaccine. So there's a few critiques of VAERS, but those are the two systems, the VAERS and BSD mainly, that we use to monitor vaccine safety in real time.
Sure. So, like, as a mom, and let's say a new vaccine were to come out recently, and let's say you're pregnant, or they're offering this vaccine to your child or to you as a mom or your family, should does is hesitancy good in that, just like generally speaking, or it came out, it has been approved, it must be safe? What's kind of your take on that?
Hesitancy when you're putting anything in your body is important. Like, if you're feeding anything to your kid, or if you're accepting any sort of treatment or medical product when you're pregnant, pausing is a good idea because you care about, your kid and you and your baby that you're growing. And so I think pause for really any sort of product prior to, not just taking it for face value is important. But especially I think for vaccines, because we kind of have to realize that although some of the newer vaccines, like, say, the monoclonal antibodies for RSV, that's kind of a newer one. Now, that's not necessarily a vaccine, but it's a newer medical product that's come out. Those clinical trials do, I'll say, look better than the ones that were done previously. Um, but I think that pausing and taking a second to be like, hey, what are the actual chances that my child is going to get sick with this? Do I feel comfortable treating the illness that they're sick with? How common is it? Can I treat it myself? What's the risk of severe, severe disease? Taking all of those risks of the disease itself into account, and then actually recognizing that vaccines and medical products do have risks themselves. And that's what I think is kind of brushed off a lot, because I think a lot of pediatricians and conventional providers really do believe that serious adverse events from vaccines are a 1 in a million chance. Like, they truly believe that there are barely any vaccine reactions at all. And I know too many people for that to be true personally. Like, I just know that to not be true. Like, it's not 1 in a million because I know, like, 6 or 7 people personally, and from all of the, messages that I have gotten where it's like, this has happened to me, this has happened to me, this has happened to me, and so that's just anecdotal evidence right there of just, in my personal circle. But also, um, recognizing that studies, are not always large enough to actually catch a serious adverse event. Like, if it were going to happen, if it were even more rare than 1 in a million, there are rarely ever clinical trials that have more than 10,000 children in them. So if it's a 1 in 15,000 chance, you're not going to know, because there's not a trial large enough for these medical products to catch some of the serious adverse events that are going to happen. So, taking a pause at and looking at these medical products and knowing that there are risks that we know and risks that we don't know about, and are you willing to take the risk of potentially, like, the potential unknown risk from this medical product, knowing that it could be beneficial, or are you going to take the risk of treating the disease naturally?
Right. Yeah. I think that that is very good insight of the risk versus the disease versus the risk of the vaccine, which, like you said, I think doesn't get discussed a lot on like the
Yeah.
medical side. We talk about the risk of this, the flu, or for example, versus the flu shot never has any vaccines. That's what I hear, or the flu shot never has any side effects, is what I hear, right?
Right.
So, which we know is false, that people have had side effects, but it may not be discussed in that kind of light. And so, could you actually, now that I'm saying it, could you bring up a vaccine that you do talk about maybe in one of like your Instagram reels or something like that, where you can share a little bit more insight on the risk of maybe the disease versus the risk of the vaccine, and maybe what some of the clinical trials look like, because I think that's what you're really good at, is bringing that light on the clinical trials and really bringing the informed consent. So I want to kind of share an example of what that looks like for our listeners, so that, because I know we've been talking about this is very vague because, every vaccine is a little bit different. So if you can get specific on maybe one that you choose.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, one of the easiest vaccines I think to talk about, I could talk about a different one that might be a little bit more tricky too, but one of the easier ones is hepatitis B vaccine at birth, right? Everybody has questions about, why am I sticking a needle in my like hour-old child for something that's usually a sexually transmitted disease? Like, what is the benefit of that? And I think that, I mean, somebody in politics, I don't know if it was RFK or Trump, even said it himself, like, why are we doing that? Like, that seems just totally unnecessary. So I can give you, I'll give you kind of the conventional side, and then, we'll go into, is it actually necessary, right? Well, if you hepatitis B is normally a sexually transmitted disease, right? And it's either through sex or it's blood to blood contact. IV drug users, it's a lot more common. It can be spread from in the household, and that's usually just from kind of like hygiene issues. So that is something. But usually it is blood to blood contact or mother to child during birth, right? Because there's a lot of blood and bodily fluids happening there. So the idea of giving hepatitis B at birth is, if mom is positive, you're going to protect that baby from getting hepatitis B. If a baby gets hepatitis B when they are born, 90% of the time it goes to a chronic hepatitis B infection, and that leads to liver cancer and cirrhosis later on in life. It could be a totally serious thing. Hepatitis B was like a thing going around in the 80s. It was a lot more common. So they wanted to create a vaccine against this issue. Well, they developed the hepatitis B vaccine. The research and development behind that vaccine is that they were testing it on orphans and disabled kids. And so they were testing and researching on orphans and disabled kids in order to figure out how to formulate this vaccine for kids. They at first gave it to at-risk people, so sex workers or homeless people, or, they tried to just give it to at-risk people to see if we can try to stop these hepatitis B infections. Well, that didn't work. And they were missing cases. Hepatitis B cases actually went up when the launch with the vaccine. So they went to make it for kids. The clinical trials for the hepatitis B vaccine, the two different brands, they included 145 children aged between the ages of like 1 and 5. And they checked their adverse reactions after receiving the vaccine for 5 days, and nothing longer than that. And so there's no, yeah. So there's no post-marketing study of that one. Like that. And this, I mean, it truly is like, it's laughable. You're like, wait, are you kidding me? And
Yeah.
the people think I'm making this stuff up, and you actually, there's a great book out right now called Vaccines Amen by Aaron Siri. He is a lawyer who does cases for those who are vaccine injured, and he's been a huge part in suing the government for issues with the vaccines approved on the childhood schedule. And so he did a massive hearing. He deposed Dr. Stanley Plotkin, who was like the godfather of vaccines. Like, he wrote this massive textbook. He's considered like the high priest, essentially, of vaccines. And he's interviewing Dr. Stanley Plotkin, and he literally has to tell him about the vaccine that he was involved in approving, because he was on the committee to approve this vaccine. And he was even like surprised during his interview that there was no literature after 5 days of monitoring. And that's,
And 145 children, that's like nothing.
right. You cannot establish safety of a medical product based on 145 children. Honestly, you can't really do it based on 1,400 children. You can't do it really on 5,000 children. Like, I mean, what is the standard, right? And so that is that is what it was approved on. 45 kids monitored for 5 days. Then it's put on the childhood schedule. And now it's considered unethical to study a group of vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids because you're potentially exposing them to hepatitis B. Let me just tell you the chances of a kid getting hepatitis B. That, I think, is a really helpful thing when we're looking at a risk-benefit analysis, right? Hepatitis B is very contagious. So if a kid gets it, it's dangerous, About less than 1% of mothers are positive for hepatitis B. And about 1 to 5% of them are carriers of hepatitis B. And there are other people who have hepatitis B, right? But it's not just this prevailing, it's not like it's an incredibly common issue. But 1% of mothers and 0.5 of them are carriers. With the level of exposure that normal children have, the idea of a child walking through a park and stepping on a dirty needle of somebody who had hepatitis B, the chances are much lower than 1 in a million. Like, one person even calculated it out to 1 in 7 million. 1 in 7 million in a kid with in normal circumstances getting fatal hepatitis B infection. It's just like, okay, yeah, the risk of hepatitis B in a child coming from a mother who is hepatitis B negative. Oh, and this is an important point too, I think, when we talk about hepatitis B. Hepatitis B cases did go down after the introduction of the vaccine. So everybody's like, yay, the vaccine saved everything. What also happened, literally the same year or the year after the vaccine was rolled out, was they started testing mothers who are pregnant for hepatitis B. They started testing them in pregnancy. Yes.
Yeah.
So
we're like, let's just test the mom.
During the time when the vaccine rolled out, they also decided to start testing mothers for hepatitis B. And if you're hepatitis B negative, then they gave it to all children regardless, but they started testing mothers to see if they were hepatitis B negative. And now today, that is a part of that's a part of the standard workup. When you're a pregnant woman, you get tested for hepatitis B. And something I think is so funny and almost sad too is that, moms will say, well, I'm hepatitis B negative. Why would I need to give my kids this, this vaccine later on? And some doctors will tell moms, well, you could go positive before you have your baby. You could go positive and not know it, because there's a statistic out there that says 60% of mothers who have hepatitis B don't know that they have hepatitis B. Well, that's an interesting statistic, because the mothers who are getting hepatitis B, what do you have to do to get hepatitis B while you're pregnant? That pregnant mom will either have to be doing IV drugs while she is pregnant, Or either she has to sleep with somebody who is not her husband and contract hepatitis B, or her husband has to cheat on her and get hepatitis B and then give her hepatitis B. So you're basing this vaccine recommendation based on like infidelity and the chance of your partner cheating on you. Now, if you're in a questionable relationship, you know, sure, like definitely take that risk into account. But I think advising, kind of the typical American family that doesn't, might not deal with that issue. I think it's kind of silly to even include that risk, into that argument, because it's, you're basing it based on risky behavior on the mom or, the spouse in that relationship. And I just am like, you know, that I just think that's a silly thing to talk about.
Right. And so then we have the alternative of, maybe the physician goes, well, there's no risk to the hepatitis B vaccine for your baby. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, well, I'd say that they're wrong. I think that there are risks associated with it, known and unknown, because we don't have a good randomized control trial of vaccinated and unvaccinated newborns receiving this vaccine on day one. They tested this vaccine on 145 children, kind of between the ages of like 1 and 5. This wasn't tested on day one infants. So that's number one. They don't have a foundation of safety to base that statement off of. Number two, the safety we do have shows some side effects, especially, inconsolable crying for several hours could be indicative of swelling in the brain, encephalitis. Fever happens between 1 and 6% of the time, and fever in the newborn, in a day one newborn, is an emergency. This is something requires a massive workup, getting blood work, a spinal tap, like a chest x-ray. I mean, a whole thing just to determine that, oh, this was just a side effect of the vaccine that they received. So those are just kind of the short-term potential side effects. Plus, some kids will get infections in the arm at the injection site. And one thing that's vaccine is there's a couple of longer term studies that have looked at risks of type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis. There was a study out of New Zealand that saw a double the risk of multiple sclerosis when receiving the hepatitis B vaccine at birth. Um, Other autoimmune issues. And there was one study that in the end of the report said that, vaccines aren't associated with autism at all. They need more research. But within the data of that report, the hepatitis B vaccine was associated with a higher risk of autism potentially. And some mechanisms by that could be the fact that it has 250 micrograms of aluminum in that vaccine. It's one of the highest containing aluminum individual vaccines there are. The combo vaccines have more aluminum in them, but just in terms of the one vaccine, the hepatitis B has one of the higher contents of aluminum. And that is what we're all wondering, is if one of the if is that kind of contributing to some of the neurodevelopmental issues we're seeing today.
Yeah. Yeah. And like my baby was born at 5.5 pounds. So
Yeah.
having something like that small just get, all of these things at one time is just kind of like baffling to me.
Yes.
Because you want to protect them with everything and they're so delicate and it's hard to picture. And then okay, so then I think some of the question from parents might be, well, if I give my baby a Hep B vaccine, what if when they get older, they were to get into, let's say, IV drug use at 16?
Risky
What
behavior.
would you say to that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the immunity from the hepatitis B vaccine does not last for life. In fact, usually it lasts about 10 years. So by the time your child is 10, they would probably need a booster anyway, because their immunity is probably gone. I had a friend who went to nursing school and she got vaccinated for hepatitis B 3 times because her titers never went up. It was like as if she just totally didn't respond to the vaccine at all. She ended up being immune after, I think, the third time. But I mean, it's when the time that they would need it, if they are going to be frisky, um, the immunity is gone usually anyway. And so the argument is to protect your child from potential contact. Now, if you're going if your kid's going into daycare, or if they're in the medical setting, I was thinking about this the other day. I have a friend who her baby has a really the osteogenesis imperfecta. And so she's having constant surgeries for broken bones, fractured bones. It's that brittle bone disease. And so there are cases of hepatitis B that happen in medical settings from not properly cleaning the instruments. So if your child is going through frequent surgeries and medical procedures, the hepatitis B vaccine could potentially be something to think about because they're under the knife a lot. And that would be, I can't imagine how hard that is. But you know, I would think the risk of hepatitis B does go up there. Does it become high enough for somebody to vaccinate? I think that's somebody's individual decision to make. And there really aren't a lot of clinical trials on children in the NICU, like premature babies receiving all of these vaccines. There are some on some of the vaccines. I know the RSV monoclonal antibodies does have a trial that they used for premature babies on there. But not the majority of the vaccine schedule. And so that's another thing too. They just go ahead and approve these vaccines for 5-pound babies, and there's not a ton of data on the safety and efficacy of the vaccine when the baby's that tiny.
Yeah. That was something I was surprised on too. We have her adjusted age and her real age, and at each appointment, we would have the vaccine schedule based on her real age, but her adjusted age is so different. So I was like, how does that even work? And I think we could have a podcast 8 hours going on all of this information. And I can tell you're so passionate about it too, which I love. But I'll try to kind of start wrapping it up for people. Um, so could you help share how parents can feel more informed? Obviously following your page too, but like what information is out there so that people and parents can feel confident in their decision?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's really it's difficult to know kind of who to trust. I think if you have a local provider that is willing to sit down with you, talk about the risks and benefits, and is not shying away from the questions like, what did this clinical trial look like? How was the safety of this vaccine established? Asking kind of more critical questions like that, and the provider's like, yeah, this was monitored for 5 days. Like, if they're outright about that and they know that information, I would say that's a provider you could probably trust, right? Because they're going to give you they show that they have a knowledge of the childhood vaccine schedule. They've potentially read the inserts, the package inserts of the products that they are offering to their patients. And they're willing to acknowledge that vaccines have side effects and potential harms. So I think finding a provider that is not shy about that and is willing to say, hey, this vaccine has some risks here, but here are the potential benefits. Here are the risks of the disease that you're vaccinating for, and potential treatments for the disease that you're vaccinating for, right? Like I think of pertussis. Pertussis is huge right now. There are so many cases of pertussis right now, which I think is interesting because the news has not picked that up at all. And they've only focused on measles, whereas there's way more pertussis cases than measles. But pertussis has data showing that it responds super well to high dose vitamin C therapy. Now, how easy is that to give to your kid? High dose vitamin C. There's a protocol from Dr. Suzanne Humphries about that, and it works very well. And pertussis is scary. It's the cough, 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 that whooping cough. Obviously, it can be really hard on younger children also. And so taking the risks into account, but also the alternative treatments. High dose vitamin C is incredibly, the safety profile is great. And it's easy to administer. So that's something to think about. Or you can think about the risks of that, the benefits of that vaccine. How long does that immunity of the pertussis vaccine cause? I know I'm talking about a different vaccine, but I want to add that the pertussis vaccine doesn't last more than a couple of years in terms of immunity. And you would need several boosters. And if you got vaccinated with the Tdap in pregnancy, your Tdap vaccine is going to influence how well that your child's DTaP series works because of the way that your maternal antibodies are affecting the vaccine that is going into your child. So, things like that. Does your provider talk about that? Like, really, I think if you can find a provider that talks about that, gives you the risks, benefits, and alternatives, and lets you make the decision and does not judge you for making that decision, then I think that's a great provider that you can trust. If you don't have that, I read, I'm thinking of different providers that provide good informed consent. Dr. Green Mom has a ton of resources. I actually did a podcast with her not too long ago talking about group B strep in pregnancy. And she's been doing this she's been doing this for like 10, 15 years now. And she's incredible. Great page, website with a ton of different blog articles and also products to help with detoxing. She has probiotics. She has things like elderberry. She has a lot of different fun things. So Dr. Green Mom's a great resource. Um, Dr. Joel Gator on Instagram has been on a ton of podcasts as well. He wrote a great book called Between a Shot and a Hard Place. I think that's a great resource. I have a whole Amazon list of books on my Instagram page, KDCPAC. You can just look at my story highlights there, and I highlight all of the books that I have used for my own informed consent for my children and my family, and what I use to help create my own content. So that those books there are really helpful. Yeah, I think Dr. Jeffrey Barkey also is, his Instagram is RX for Liberty. He's actually my supervising physician, so I got to give a plug for him too. He's a great guy giving informed consent as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And then because there is a divide and we are, I think, a little bit hesitant to speak to each other about this or have like mom friends who may have a different vaccine decision than you. So, how can moms support each other even when we make different choices?
Great question. Yeah. I think just recognizing that there are risks with every decision we make as a parent. I mean, you know, like, did I let my kid ride a bike with a helmet today or not? Like, it's just like there's different decisions you make throughout your daily life that have risk for your child. And I think we have been so conditioned to fear being sick. So that has been a huge reason why the childhood vaccination schedule has completely just blown up and not been questioned because everybody's just afraid of getting sick. So recognizing that you as a parent might feel okay with your child getting an illness and being able to treat it and be just fine rather than accept a medical product that has questionable safety. Or even if it has, fine safety with what we have, but you still just don't feel comfortable with it, then, you have to recognize, I think if you, the individual mom, are the reasonable person and knowing that other moms might not feel comfortable with letting their kid get sick or they feel more comfortable with vaccinating their children, I just don't think that there's a really true right and wrong answer, and just letting moms do what they think is best for their family. Um, in terms of having kind of the courage to speak out about it, knowing that you know, I think being informed and knowing why you're making the decision that you are, knowing the alternative treatments, and just feeling confident in that decision is so helpful when you're talking to other moms who may question your decision to potentially, not vaccinate your child or delay the vaccinations. They're going to come at you with kind of bullets of different evidence, and I think kind of disarming the weapon where you're just like, I don't trust the clinical trials that these vaccines are based on. Like that, I mean, they're based on a certain sort of safety. And if you don't trust that safety, then that's your own decision and you can feel confident in that. And that's something where you might receive some judgment from other moms, but also you'll find your group of people who are like-minded, and even if they don't make the same decision as you, just knowing that every mom is nobody wants a sick kid, whether it be from a disease or from a reaction to a vaccine. So everybody's just trying their best.
Yeah, and I've even had moms reach out to me too saying, "Hey, I've like let's say vaccinated until they're 6 months or so, and now it's like really pulling at my heart that I don't know if I want to continue." So, we can always change our decision
Always
as we
change your
go along
mind.
too, and that's perfectly okay too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And no judgment there also, it's like if you felt less informed and you wanted to receive those medical products at the time, and then now you're feeling better and more confident to, not accept those medical products at that time, then it's totally okay to change your mind. I think a lot of moms potentially feel guilt for vaccinating their child with all of this kind of information coming out. And I always just say to moms, you did the best you could with the information that you had. And this wasn't like we were always taught to trust our doctors. Like the idea of questioning your doctor is a very new concept within probably the last 5 years, if you can imagine what happened to make us all question the medical establishment. It's something where it's just not, it's a newer concept, and so I don't think there's reason to feel guilt. It's more of like a, you know, hopefully they're fine, right? It's kind of like, okay, like, now I know, right? And, maybe you can find the root cause for some of, their potential issues if they have any, and try to help treat those if you can. But if you can't, then just, knowing that you did the best you could with the information that you had.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, this has been very, very helpful, I think. And my process starting this, so when I was in pharmacy school too, I just kind of believed everything that I was being taught, and we didn't dive into it as deep as like you're educating people on social media. And it was like a one semester type of course. And then we moved on with pharmacy school because there's a lot of information to know. But as I was getting closer to motherhood and I would hear like the one or two types of kind of feels sketchy type of clinical trials or information, or even hearing other moms say, this is what happened with my child. And like you said, they say 1 in a million, but you're like, how do I know so many people that this has affected? And so I'm taking that into consideration. And then that just it makes me more hesitant as we go on, right? And so, like, when I
Mhm.
started learning it, I'm like, "Okay, maybe not that one," and then that's why I progressively kind of went the more natural route for me and my family, and then I do feel more confident in treating an illness because, sickness does happen and our body is equipped to handle that with a lot of things. A fever isn't bad, a fever can help get rid of an illness naturally. Now we can keep an eye on that fever, absolutely, and we can help with either whether it's supplements, whether it's elderberry, whether it's rest, whether it's water and hydration, whether it's a tepid bath. There are like other mechanisms that we can do, and so I think that this information was super helpful. And I think you dropped your Instagram already, but just in case someone missed it, how do they find you, Katie?
Yes, so my Instagram handle is katiec.pac, and I'm going to be offering an exciting community coming up soon, where I will offer some exclusive content, live calls, and then the potential for one-on-one consults as well. That is in the works, hopefully coming and launching within the next 2 weeks.
Whoa, that is huge. That'll be so helpful for so many moms and so many people wanting that information. And then I always ask this too, but do you have one piece of advice for our functional medicine for mom listeners?
I think recognizing that there are risks with every decision that you make as a parent, and you're doing the best you can with the information that you have. So do your best to stay informed and know that, your family and your child were created and loved with a purpose and a design that is so complex and amazing. Um, but we also live in a world where there's sin and problems and issues. So balancing that and knowing that there are risks with every decision that you make, and just leaving it up to, knowing that you don't have everything in control. And that's okay. And you can just do the best you can with the information that you have.
Yes, beautiful. I always tell people too, especially as they're getting pregnant or whatever, I say, God chose you to be the mother of this child, and you are well equipped to do that. Now, it's still your responsibility to obviously do whatever research that you feel appropriate, but you are equipped and you're the mother of that child for a reason. So
Mm.
I love that. And I think we can kind of wrap up there and end there. And thank you so much, Katie, for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been so fun.
Thanks so much for listening to my podcast, Functional Medicine for Moms. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you never miss one, leave a quick 5-star review, and share it with your mom friends who love it too. I'm Kelly with a background as a pharmacist and training in functional medicine. I help women move past fatigue, brain fog, gut issues, and hormone struggles so they can thrive in everyday life or prepare for a healthy pregnancy. Through lab testing, personalized supplements, and functional medicine coaching, I help you feel better, faster, naturally. Want to connect more? Head over to molinmethod.com or come hang out with me on Instagram and YouTube at Functional Medicine for Moms. On my site, you can order professional grade supplements at my discount or book a free discovery call if you'd like to see how we can work together on your health. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not medical advice. Always talk to your provider before making changes to your health plan. And remember, healthy moms raise healthy families. Catch you next time. New episodes released every Wednesday.